Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Maya, and today I'll be showing some updated strategies for preventing REDCap survey fraud. This presentation is going to help public-facing surveys deal with bad actors that might be trying to benefit from participation in your study. In this presentation, we're going to cover 3 different types of strategies, starting off with survey design, then some consent measures, and then lastly, REDCap monitoring strategies. For a more detailed overview of what we're going to cover, in survey design, we'll talk about Google's reCAPTCHA feature as well as REDCap's plugin for NetCAPTCHA. When it comes to instruments, we'll cover tricks like validation, action tags, and then also word choices like inverse or open eligibility questions. In the consent and measure section, we'll talk about specific consent language that you can include in your consent procedure, as well as a measure that you can include in your assessment battery called the conscientious responder scale that can serve as an attention check. Lastly, in the REDCap monitoring section, we'll cover trap fields, such as setting up contradiction or hidden fields. We'll cover QA forms and then also survey completion times, as well as data quality rules, and we'll round out with response limits and how you can set those up. Okay, so to start off with survey design, we're going to first look at Google's reCAPTCHA feature. You can find this in the Survey Distribution Tools page, which if we're looking at our example project, over on the left-hand side in the Data Collection section, you'll find the link to that page. Then you'll look for this checkbox here that says Protect the Public Survey using reCAPTCHA. Check that off, and you're good to go. NetCAPTCHA is a plugin module or an external module, so to access that, you'll have to go to a little bit further down on that same left-hand side page. In the External Modules section, you'll click Manage, then look for a green button that lists all View Available Modules, and you can either search through the alphabetical list or just type in NED to make the search a little bit easier and click Enable. From there, you'll want to look at the configuration of the module. By default, it's set to the math question that we saw on the example picture, but you do have access to a distorted text image, or you can even create your own custom prompts. So feel free to take a look at that module if that's the one that you prefer, and go ahead and configure it to your preferences. For variable-specific programming choices, there's a couple of tips that we have to make it easier to spot duplicates. The first are to use validation. When you're looking at email fields or phone number fields, setting those validations will require those questions to be filled in with what they're expecting. An email will require your standard email formatting, and then phone numbers will require a 10-digit American phone number. For your identifying information like first and last name, we recommend asking that in separate fields. That will make it a little bit easier to make manipulations with it and search for people's names individually to spot those duplicates. So if we're looking at our example project and you go to the designer page and you're editing your survey, you'll see that for this example, we have our first and last name asked in separate fields. Our email field has the validation set to email, and then the phone number field has the validation set to phone number. When you're programming your questions that have answer choices, we recommend using the random order action tag. What that does is scramble your answer choices to make it a little bit more obvious when people or bots are always choosing the same response to every question. If you look at the example picture here that we have this question asking the participant to choose the number 4, the answer choices have been scrambled. When we're looking at the designer version, or when our programming of that question, you'll see that we programmed it just like a regular question, choose the number 4, and they are listed 1, 2, 3, 4. However, the random order action tag is doing the work for us to scramble this and make it a little bit more resistant to fraud. When it comes to language choices that you can make to make your surveys a little bit more resistant to fraud, we have these 2 strategies. The first is to invert your eligibility fields. The purpose of this is to ask your questions in a way that you're not looking for the affirmative. So for example, if you're looking for foreign-born individuals to participate in your study, asking the question, were you born in the US, might prompt people trying to force their way into your studies to answer in the affirmative to try to get in. However, you're looking for the opposite. In the other example that we have here, if you're looking for people living with HIV, ask the question, are you currently not living with HIV? To hopefully catch people that are only answering in the affirmative to try to sneak their way in. An alternative is to ask your questions in open-ended manners as much as you can. For example, if you're looking for Miami-based people, asking what county do you live in and letting them choose from the list of counties will make it a lot harder for them to predict what you're looking for. Same thing for age requirements. Asking how old you are with a text box question will make it a lot harder than, say, asking, are you currently within the ages of 18 to 39, if that is your eligibility criteria. So when it comes to your consent form and your measures that you can include, for your consent, we recommend including warning text, like data will be screened for multiple submissions, or all information must be honest, accurate, and correct to be eligible for compensation, to protect your study from having to include data or compensate for participation for responses that have been deemed fraudulent. In your measures, you can include a conscientious responder scale, which basically has questions that have pre-designated answers that participants must choose. These are two examples where you're asking someone to choose the option strongly disagree or selecting the second option disagree. For your actual participants, we do recommend that you let them know that some questions are for fraud detection, just so that they know to expect these questions while they're filling out your surveys. For REDCap monitoring strategies, we have a couple here that we'll walk you through. So the first one here is to create fields that catch contradictions. This one is going to be ideal for multi-step surveys, like when you have a pre-screen that proceeds to a full screen. And these types of questions are going to require a pair of two questions that have a similar theme or will require confirmation of the same information. Here we have a couple examples of what that could look like. If you're asking for data on city and zip code, you can compare the two to make sure that they line up. Same thing for county and city, age as a self-report item, and then confirming it with a date of birth. Or you can ask the same question twice on separate instruments to make sure that they are the same. You can also leverage hidden fields and REDCap reports to bolster your study. With hidden fields, what you can do is use email validated fields, naming them something like dummy email or dummy email 2 with labels like email or additional information. You're basically setting up keywords here that when you pair it with the hidden survey action tag, create trap fields that bots will often see when they're trying to fill out your survey and insert values that they think you are expecting. The goal is to create secret prompts that will trick a bot into entering a red flag. From there, you can use REDCap alerts to notify staff when that hidden field is filled. So here's what that can look like in our example project. If we go to the designer, you'll see that we have included the email fields with that hidden survey action tag. Same thing, we're providing keywords here that we can try to prompt the bot to fill in. And then if we look at our alert, we've set it up in such a way that we have it named potential survey bot. And the logic of when this triggers is going to be when those hidden email fields are no longer blank. So we are setting up an alert that will trigger when that is filled out to let research staff know, hey, we might have a fraudulent response here. Please review those records. These next strategies are going to be talking about a checklist or scheduled reviews that you can do. They have a couple of different components to them that we'll go over in detail. The first one's going to be talking about a QA form that you can use to sample a random number of records, which is really good for record level supervision. We'll talk about monitoring survey completion time, which is a good project level supervision tool, and then also using response limits, again at a project level to prevent flooding. So for your QA form, you can do a lot of things to make this easier to fill out. Use piping, action tags, and smart variables to make this easier to fill out. Again, this is really good for record level monitoring. What you'll want to do is list any and all key variables that you want to make sure are reviewed whenever a QA form is filled out. You can do this for a random number of records at each sitting. Again, designate for whatever your study would find appropriate, just so that you're not burdening your research staff with reviewing every single record, especially if you're collecting a lot of data. I wanted to include here the action tag that you can use to make filling out who did the QA form a little bit easier. So in the slides that we're providing, you can go ahead and copy this and put it into the action tag section of your field for your staff completing the QA to fill in the name of whoever is signed into their REDCap account. For survey completion times, here again we have the action tag that you can copy from the slide to add into your action tag section to create the variable that's going to monitor how quickly a respondent is completing your surveys. And so, using completion time, you can find suspiciously quick submissions. Usually a bot that is not carefully built is going to be able to finish a long survey in seconds. And so just to show you what that looks like, again, we have in our example project the completion time in seconds with the same code that you saw on the slide. And what that's going to do is provide that to us when a survey is submitted. If you're not seeing it, we have a couple of troubleshooting tips here. You can check data quality rule H, which in the picture you could see is on the left-hand side pointing with the purple arrow, and then the rule to execute it is the button on the right-hand side. What data quality rule H does is tell you if there are any records that have an incorrect value for a calculated field. The calculated field here is the completion time in seconds. And so if it does catch any that are blank, you can select View and then the button for Fix Calcs Now to fill in the missing time that should be there. Another note is that that code will only work for responses that are submitted in survey mode. So if we're looking at our project, for the status dashboard, we can see that I have a bunch of fake records here that have, for the most part, been submitted in survey mode. However, if we look at record 7 or these other variant dots, they have not been either finished or submitted in survey mode. So when we look at our report, we'll see that those same records are missing the completion time. So make sure that your survey is being submitted through survey mode in order to get a completion time recorded. And from there, again, you can use this report to make sure that all of your completion times are within your expected ranges and nothing suspiciously fast is being submitted. To segue into data quality rules that are custom, it's on that same page as data quality rule H, and you can use logic building rules that are throughout REDCap to create checks for specific variables that you want to make sure are being filled in, or any other custom rules if you are looking for specific values and things like that. Here we have an example that we want to check our database for no missing viral loads, where the rule is checking if our HIV viral load is blank. So if we look at our example project, we can see that the custom rule here, if we were to execute it, similar to rule H, we can see which records here are missing viral loads to dig further in during our quality assurance process. And then lastly, you also have access to response limits. This control can be found in the survey settings of your instruments. So when you go into designer mode and you see for any survey that is enabled, you have access to this survey settings. So if you go into that page and scroll down, you should be able to find this little section here where you can control response limits. What this does is when you set it with a number, it will automatically freeze your survey after that number of responses has been met to prevent flooding. So on a public-facing survey, this will be very helpful if you do get hit with fraudulent responses to at the very least limit how many can be entered. From there, during your quality assurance process, designated staff could complete your database review and then increase the limit by that set amount each time. A good tip here is that the limit message is custom, so you can set the pace for your participants of when to check back. That way you can let them know why the survey is no longer available and when they could expect to check back to fill in those responses. We also do advise you to work with your REDCap administrator and your institution's research offices for additional resources. If you're working on an HIV-related project, you can also contact us through the CHARM website, and that way you can tailor your questions or your specific survey needs to the appropriate places. Huge thank you to these folks that have provided their experiences or their advice to this presentation, and I'll leave you with the link again to the CHARM website, as well as a QR code if you'd like to request help with the research navigation portal. Thank you, and I'll hope to see you in the next one.